So I talk about global issues, and one of my Canadian supporters sent me this story. She actually sent me a YouTube, but the YouTube sent me to this article. And this is out of Canada. The Blue Wall of Silence protects police officers accused of gender based violence, victims say. It says new data reveals one in three suspensions across Ontario involved allegations of domestic abuse and SA.
Families fleeing abuse, including women who have left homes they shared with police officers.
And those are always the cases that are the most frightening for our staff.
Kelly Donovan knows those concerns well. The now former constable left an abusive relationship with a police officer. She now researches police culture and supports whistleblowers.
You'll hear that the woman might have said to her partner, like, stop doing this or I'm going to call the police. And they'll say, I am the police.
According to data compiled by CBC News, 1 in 3 officer suspensions in Ontario since 2013 concerned allegations of gender-based violence. That includes domestic abuse, sexual assault, and harassment that occurred both on and off duty. This political science professor says the culture of policing is part of the problem.
Because fellow officers are unlikely to report them because they want to respect that culture of policing and that culture of we protect one another, which creates what we call this blue wall of silence.
This former police chief says he's disheartened by the data, but he says officers are human.
Those types of allegations and crimes have very significant impacts on a lot of people and badly impact victims. And keeping in mind that these are events that occur in the officer's private life.
Our investigation found that about a third of the officers convicted of crimes involving gender-based violence went back to work as officers. There's no rule against this unless an officer is sentenced to jail. Carrie Lewis calls that troubling.
They should be held to a much higher standard than anyone else because they hold such power.
Like the police, Lewis says her employees are responsible for protecting vulnerable people, but she says workers here would not be allowed back on the job after those kinds of convictions. Julie Ireton, CBC News, Ottawa.
So just know and understand this is a very sensitive topic. It's going to talk about DV and SA and all of that. Okay, let's get into the article. She was a sergeant and he was a constable when they met at work and became a power couple sporting matching police badges, but their love story would end in violence. It didn't matter that she outranked him. What happened flipped their power balance. It was just a slow burn downhill into what became a serious situation of coercive control, which I didn't see that clearly at the time. It began with verbal insults, but the woman said her ex-husband became increasingly controlling. He even used a listening device to spy on her, according to court files. It all came to a head one night in July 2019. There was an explosive confrontation, she said. He was chasing me and the kids around the house, and we barricaded ourselves in the bedroom, and he broke in, and my son was trying to defend me. It was such a scene. She called her boss, then escaped the house. I went to my own police headquarters in my pajama shirt. The police were concerned her husband might be armed, so they dispatched a tactical unit. My kids saw their dad get arrested, said the sergeant, who the CBC News has agreed not to name to protect her safety. I had to stay in the DV office until they could execute a search warrant because they couldn't find his pew-pew. It wasn't where it was supposed to be at work. Her then husband was locked up in jail while officers searched the couple's home. Police eventually charged him with intercepting private communications, assault, extortion, and careless storage of a firearm. The officer from the Greater Toronto area was suspended with pay. He will go on to stay home for 646 days, collecting almost $300,000 in salary before he finally resigned in 2021. So this man was able to resign and not get fired. Now, there was also an investigation in Canada that was talking about how much money has been spent on suspensions, where these cops get to receive salary without working it's wild. And I'm going to play that video.
P officer Jason Redmond spent nearly 8 years on paid suspension. After multiple convictions over the years, including drug trafficking and sexual assault, the constable was finally fired last summer. By then, he had already taken home more than $1.2 million in pay. Details of this Brockville case triggered public outrage. But it's just one of more than 450 cases of suspended officers CBC News found through publicly available data in Ontario. Officers were suspended with pay for a variety of allegations, everything from drunk driving to fraud, manslaughter, sexual assault, and intimate partner violence or disciplinary violations. The total cost? More than $134 million since 2013. The longest, most costly suspension is OPP Detective Sergeant James Christie. He's a former police union executive, suspended for 9 years and counting. Christie has been paid more than $1.5 million to stay home from work.
Most police officers are working professionally and doing their jobs properly, but we see these cases, and these are the cases that really, anger people and piss people off.
Since 2010, Ontario police chiefs have lobbied for the ability to suspend accused officers without pay. It's a power other police forces in Canada, including the RCMP, have had for years.
Our legislation will, if passed, provide transparency and clarity to police officers.
The Ford government said it would bring in reform 4 years ago. New legislation finally came into effect this month. But the new suspension without pay provision only applies in certain very serious criminal cases, and only after the approval of a hearing.
To be honest with you, not a lot.
Former Niagara Chief Jeff McGuire doesn't think it will make much of a difference in terms of fewer suspensions with pay.
There are still many opportunities that we believe a person should likely be suspended without pay.
By contrast, the police union is satisfied with the new provisions.
No agency or government department keeps track or makes public the number of police suspensions in Ontario. Critics say that leaves the public in the dark in terms of the scope of suspensions and their outcomes. Julie Ireton, CBC News, Ottawa.
Throughout this ordeal, his ex-wife said she was the one treated as the outcast. No one came to me and said, okay, we've rallied the troops. This is what to expect. This is how you go back to work, she recalled. None of that happened because we live in a patriarchy. A patriarchy is typically led by men, for men, and protects other men. And the sooner we all figure out that this globe is a global patriarchy that needs to tumble, then we're going to be facing this. This woman has a come to Jesus moment where she's seeing that even her supposed brothers in blue are protecting another man. Her ex is more than 453 cases of suspension with pay in Ontario over the past decade at the cost of $134 million, according to an exclusive CBC investigation. Okay. Allegations of gender-based violence made against police officers from 2013 to 2024. And this is based on 158 cases compiled by the CBC and reported between 2013 and 2024. 44% of them were SA. 42% were intimate partner violence, multiple allegations of gender-based violence, and there were 6% that was sexual harassment. CBC's literature found that more than 1/3 of the allegations leading to officer suspensions since 2013 involved gender-based violence, including SA, DV, and sexual harassment. In the literature on gender-based violence, police are disproportionately perps of particularly DV, said Danielle McNabb, an assistant professor who researches Canadian public law at Brock University. I do think that this really constitutes the tip of the iceberg from what we know about the pervasive underreporting of gender-based violence. The variety of scenarios uncovered in the CBC's data include off-duty officers who allegedly abused their spouses, on-duty officers who had sex with vulnerable people, as well as cops who worked in sexual or domestic abuse units. CBC's dataset also revealed multiple cases where the victims, girlfriends, wives, and partners of officers, are themselves serving in law enforcement. And like the sergeant from the GTA, they found themselves on the other side of the desk in a policing system they say is unsupportive and rife with professional conflict. So this woman down here, Kelly Donovan, she decided to become a police officer because she wanted to make a change from the inside. Kelly Donovan decided to become a police officer to effect change after leaving an abusive common law relationship with a Southwestern Ontario officer. He had always kind of been controlling, said Donovan of their long term relationship. The abuse became physical, and I had to eventually go to the police for help. But she said the officer who arrived talked her into watering down her statement. He kept saying, "You need to understand the implications of what you're telling me," Donovan remembers. No charges were laid against her ex. The experience galvanized Donovan in part to join a nearby police force. She became a constable with the Waterloo Regional Police Service in late 2010. 6 years into the job, she worried her employer wasn't consistent when it came to handling allegations against his own members. They weren't investigating their own people for DV the way they were investigating members of the public. I knew I had to do something about it. And that's the thing, when you have these MFers in charge from top to bottom of investigating, being the judge, being on juries, they are going to side or tend to side with these men. And so that is the reason why these things need to be highlighted. In 2016, Donovan took a day off work and presented her concerns to Waterloo's Police Services Board. Her plan was to encourage the force to establish a new policy for conducting investigations involving fellow officers. But within days, Donovan was reprimanded. The chief forbade her from appearing at future board meetings without the chief's permission, and she was put on administrative duties. So she got more pushback. She got more consequences than these men who were accused of DV and violence. And intimate partner violence. According to a professional standards directive, the force alleged she had criticized the police service and divulged information about a case without permission. An internal investigation was launched into multiple disciplinary charges against Donovan, including breach of confidence and neglect of duty. Police leadership maintained she broke the code of conduct. She saw it as retaliation and said she was muzzled. Donovan resigned from the force 14 months later. The now former chief has said that Waterloo Police are committed to building and modernizing a strong workforce where all members thrive, but the legal battle between Donovan and the Waterloo force continues. Today, she's a vocal critic of the way police forces across Canada handle internal investigations. When you look at the transcripts from court hearings and things for DV, the woman might have said to her partner, "Stop doing this or I'm going to call the police," Donovan said. And they'll say, "I am the police. Do you think my buddies are going to come here and arrest me?" Y'all, this sounds precisely like America. These are the outcomes for police officers criminally charged with gender-based violence. 36% were convicted. Almost 25% were not convicted. 11% have a verdict pending, and almost 28% is an unknown outcome. "It disheartens me for sure," said Jeff McGuire, executive director of the Ontario Association for Chiefs of Police, reacting to the CBC's gender-based violence data. He continues with, "Keeping in mind that these are events that occur in the officer's private life, but then the data does include some allegations where some incidents took place while the officers were on duty." I'm going to wrap this here, but people continue to say, "Don't date police officers, don't date military men." And it is because of this wall of silence where men come in, swoop in, and protect other men. And I don't know how things are going to change, because when women like this one woman tried to change from the inside, they pushed her out as well. And these men are men, no matter the profession or no matter the title they hold. All right, jump in the comments. Let me know what you think about this one. Don't forget. So I got this comment under one of my posts 2 days ago. This woman says, "Women in Canada couldn't have a checking account until 1974. Husbands could beat and grape us. Women in Canada had to go to the Privy Council to be declared persons under the law. Women had no rights in the 1950s. There were no laws to protect them. There were no women's shelters. Women didn't have equal rights to men in Canada until 1982. The crazy thing is, globally, women had to fight to just be seen as humans that were not second class citizens, that were not property of men, who had the right to be safe and have some opportunities. And so, obviously, we barely learned women's history in America. So, obviously, I don't know Canadian history, but this is the type of comment that makes me go and look for more history. And I'm going to do some of this history because a lot of people are like, let's just run up to Canada if Trump is elected. Canada is still a patriarchy. Many other countries in this world are still patriarchies, and many women around the globe still face similar situations, some better than others, some with more rights than others, but still, our rights are still very tenuous and can be taken away, just like we had to fight for them to begin with. So I found this article. I am not doing an extensive deep dive into the history of Canada, but this gives some key points. So before colonization, Aboriginal women had a voice in the decision-making process of their communities. So this is before 1899. The Iroquois and the Mohawk, for example, were a matrilineal society. So women actually had rights and some powers and leadership positions there. 1791, the Constitutional Act allowed all persons with property to vote. So you know that women didn't have property, so women couldn't vote. 1849, all Canadian women, regardless of race, religion, or property rights, were banned from voting. 1850, because of the need, employers were able to use women because they needed them to work. That doesn't mean that women had equal opportunities, but they were able to be used for the labor market. In the 1900s, just like in America, teaching was the only career open to women in Canada that led to a pension. 1901, women made up 13% of the total paid labor force. The marriage bar was in operation. Women were legally required to resign upon marriage. So they get married, they got to quit. Y'all, 1909, they had to add this to the criminal code. The criminal code is amended to make illegal the kidnapping of women. So now you can't kidnap women. The fact that it had to be made a law just shows what kind of situation women were living in. 1911, the CLC supports equal pay for equal work. So 1918, Canadian women, but not the Aboriginal or Asian women, won the right to vote in federal elections. Y'all know that just like here in America, the Native Americans were pushed to reservations and stripped of their rights. Same thing happened with the Aboriginals that were in the natives that were in Canada. They were stripped of rights, just like they were once the Alabasters landed on their soil. 1921, women made up 15% of the paid labor force. 21% of women in labor force worked as domestics. 1921, Nellie McClung is elected to the Alberta legislature, where she works for pensions, family allowance, and birth control. 1925, the Federal Divorce Act is modified to entitle women and men to divorce for the same reasons. Previous to that, women had to prove bestiality on the part of their husbands. 1940, women get the right to vote in Quebec. 1941, women make up 20% of the workforce. 1941, Quebec allows women to practice law. 1943, women entered paid labor force in massive numbers in jobs traditionally held by men. Oh, I didn't know this, but before 1947, when Canadian women married non-Canadian men, they would lose their citizenship. That changed after 1947. 1955, restrictions on married women holding federal civil service offices were abolished. And 1955, it looks like they were importing a bunch of Caribbean women. Women from Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, and Tobago, and other Caribbean countries are recruited as domestics and received immigrant status. So they were bringing in the colored folks, and that is how This looks like this is how Canada got a large Caribbean community. 1956, legislation was enacted guaranteeing equal pay for equal work within the federal jurisdiction. Women literally had to claw for equal pay all over the globe, and we're still clawing to get up to that equality. So, like, when people act like, things are just so great everywhere, no, you got to look at these dates. Women, we had to be on this trajectory up simply because men in charge, because these are always patriarchies, have kept women oppressed. 1960s, the start of women's liberation movement. So that coincides with the feminist movement here in the United States. It consisted largely of white, well-educated women who fought for reforms such as paid maternity leave, rape crisis centers, and changes to smorgasbord laws. 1960, Aboriginal women won the right to vote in federal elections, a right which had been granted to many other Canadian women in 1918 without having to abandon their Indian status. 1964, married women could be jury members. 1964, women could finally get their own bank account without getting their husband's signature. 1970s, 2/3 of welfare recipients were women. That's because women earned 57 cents to every dollar earned by men. Now, what were Black women making compared to white men? Who knows? But you know that if it's 57 cents right here, that Black women and the Caribbean women were probably making even less. 1983, grape laws are modified to include sexual aggression and to make it illegal the grape of a wife by her husband. That was 1983. I was literally born in 1980. They had to make laws in this country, in the United States and Canada, and I'm sure elsewhere, to make it illegal to grape your wife. And it didn't pass until I was born. Please keep this in mind when people are sitting up here trying to roll back history. They're doing that because they want to systematically strip women of rights. And since so many people don't know the rights that had to be won and that these were specific dates, they don't know that this was hard fought. They stay acting like feminism is just the hatred of men. No, it's just women literally trying to be seen as human and have basic human rights. I appreciate this woman for taking the time to make this comment because it made me dig a little bit deeper. If other women of the global community want to drop me some nuggets, I will take some time and examine the history of when y'all got your rights in your particular countries. But I just want to keep hammering home that we are just now getting rights within my lifetime, within my mother's lifetime, and continuing to let our rights be eroded will have us back in those times. We literally just got them. So let's not take our foot off the gas. Jump in the comments. Let me know what you think about this. Don't forget to like, comment, and share.